Part 4 of that 64 custom deluxe reverb project. Almost done, a few little tweaks left. I'll show you those. First of all, here's the redone filter caps board. And you can see I've got this 20 gauge stranded Teflon coated wire going everywhere. On the original 60s amps, there are 3 connections here at the screen, 3 yellow wires. This one is actually split inside the amp. You'll see that at the board, so there's no need to have 3 wires coming in here, so just the 2 here. Everything's very solid. Had to drill the hole there and put in the neoprene grommet so I could run the wires through without chafing against a metal hole in the chassis, but the hole itself is non-jagged and looks just like one of the factory holes. Haybor power transformer, Haybor output transformer. The stock GZ34 the amp came in with had some flex on the inside of the glass. So this is a new JJ GZ34 here. The original groove tube labeled JJ6V6Ss are working fine, but they tend to go microphonic in a combo. I'll talk to the owner and see if he wants me to replace them. I'm liking the electroharmonic 6V6s these days, but that's purely optional. These are fine now, and they're not microphonic at the moment. I've got tube shields on V1, 2, and 4 for RF interference at the bench, so I get the quietest performance while testing. But everything inside here right now are pretty much factory groove tubes. It's got one Svetlana in V5. These 3 tubes I think could be better than the factory groove tubes, which are actually JJ ECC 83s. Nothing wrong with the JJ ECC 83s. They're just a little bit noisier than they should be. So I think some fresh tubes in these 3 spots will yield a tonal benefit. I showed you a lot of this in the previous video, but everything's completed now. So I've got the new 20 gauge heater wires going through. If these were 6L6s or 34s, I'd use 18 gauge up to the last octal socket. But for 6V6s, this 20 is fine. 3 watt, 470 ohm screen grid resistors mounted away from the tube itself, just so they're subject to less radiant heat. New grid stoppers in place, everything wired up. The grounds for the chassis grounds rather, on the octal socket cathodes are made there. Bias pot all wired up. Bias set about 55-58% idle dissipation. That additional cap there off the wiper that I often do on these amps. All the wiring to the preamp tubes is very neat. Each wire is just as long as it needs to be with a little bit of slack, but no spaghetti. Triode to triode isolation is more or less in place as much as possible with this board layout. The connections at the board are good. The connections at the tube sockets are good. While on a build, I would usually do yellow for cathodes, greens for grids where it's not shielded, and blues for plates. In this case, I did like they did in the 60s Fenders. So all the colors in this, including to the tone stack and stuff, is done with the 60s colors. So all yellow on this end of things. The easiest way to get consistently twisted heater wires is to tuck the 2 bits of wire into a drill and clamp the other side to something or grab it with some pliers and then just twist, baby, twist. And that's how you get this. This is pretty much perfect. You can see I did it just like on the AB763s with the blue and yellow wires spanning the board, twisting together for support, and a little bit of shielding that B+ gives. The reservoir, screen, and phase inverter wires are all twisted together, running here inside the chassis, then going through this grommet to the power transformer. That's the one I had to drill and add because they had all this on the outside coming through a hole over here. I thought this was the better way to go. And again, the original colors. Speaking of original colors, here are the 3 wires going to the tone stack for the normal channel. So treble, mids, bass wires. Same thing here going underneath everything. It goes over to the stuff for the vibrato channel. So again, treble, mids, bass connections. Then I've got a cluster of wires coming here, going to the reverb. Here to the reverb. And then this cluster of wires for the tremolo vibrato stuff. So these are all Fender color codes, though I'm using modern wire, not the cloth-covered pushback stuff. The factory volume pot here on the normal channel had an intermittent connection to the ground. So I changed that out. I had another CTS J-taper 1 meg in here. So I put that in here. And on this channel, I've actually done it like a super reverb rather than a deluxe reverb. So it's got a 22 nanofarad mids cap rather than 47. And instead of the 6.8K resistor, this is a 1.5K, which is very similar to what you would have with a super reverb with a mids knob at noon. So it makes this channel sound different from this channel. You'll hear it soon. I went with half-watt carbon films for this amp to give the right balance between low noise and some of the carbon mojo that people talk about with old Fenders. It can make a difference. Not as radical as some of the other choices I made in terms of things like ceramic instead of mica. But these are all Class 2 ceramic disc caps. The factory had some big 1 and 2 watt metal films, which on paper were great, but they were terrible quality resistors, and they didn't really fit the space in all the locations. So these really fit really well, and I don't have any noise issues with these, so I think this is the way to do it. I went with the Vishay MKT 1813 caps for all these yellow coupling caps. I could have used an orange drop, would not have been as structurally well supported in this amp with the long spans. I could have done very expensive blue Sozos or blue Synergies. Would have cost a good bit more, would have sounded the same. What I certainly didn't want to use was this bullshit that Fender's putting out now, which is a very, very cheap cap inside a larger plastic housing with a vintage-looking logo on it. That's not what a Blue Ajax looks like. That's not how a Blue Ajax sounds. It's not how a Blue Ajax was built. It's just garbage, marketing garbage. These are a great, sensible choice. They sound fantastic. I went with Vishays for the axial electrolytics in this amp, including one of the bias supply. They always work well. They're physically small for what they give you, and they're just very reliable, relatively well-priced capacitors. For the tremolo circuit, you can see that it does not match the printing on the board. I changed from their bias tremolo circuit to this opto. So the layout is different, but I made the eyelets work. So I've got some 1 kilovolt Muratas for the caps in the LFO. And I've got the Roach here, nicely heat shrinked. And so 10 meg, 100K, 1 meg, 1 meg, 2.2 meg. Let's see here, 100K, bypassed, 2.7K. This should all be familiar to people who've worked on these Fenders before. The layout's just a bit different. 220K here, of course. And a completely standard AB763 phase inverter layout. The only difference being here. So this is the 100 ohm to ground, 47 ohm to ground, and this is the negative feedback 820. So let's try the normal channel. I'm using that Springfield with single coil, so I gotta watch the 60 cycle buzz, and proximity to the transformers gives me some buzz, but you can hear through that. Sounds like a Super Reverb with a Strat Auto Sound without the reverb. I happen to know that the owner of this amp owns an awful lot of pedals, so this is just a nice way to make this channel be a little bit different from the reverb channel. But here's the reverb channel. The owner wanted the minimum speed to be slower than stock, so he's got it. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how this has come out. You'll probably hear a final playing video with a Deluxe Reverb speaker and cab and all that fun stuff, and not bench stuff. I might even get a nicer player than me to play through it for you guys. But I think we're just 3 preamp tubes away from a much nicer amp, and I'll talk to the owner and see if he primarily plays Les Pauls or 335s or other humbucker equipped guitars. He might prefer to have a bright cap here. You can see that I don't have a bright cap on there. The original 60s Deluxe Reverb had a 47 picofarad bright cap there. With tellies, with strats, it can be a little bit too ice picky. So in general, I leave it off for most players. But some guys, you know, they love the 335. He may like the sound. I'll be glad to show with and without with different guitars in a future video for the owner. So before I send this back, he'll be able to make a very informed decision. So not quite done, but almost, and so much better than where we started. Thanks for watching.